Okay, so welcome back. It's time to start session 2, Benefits from SDG Data Lab. And this session will be moderated by Live Rognerud from Statistics Norway. So Live, the floor is yours, please.
There, can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you very much, Renata, and welcome to session 2 on benefits from the SDG Data Lab. As you notice, we are a little bit behind, but I hope that we can do all the presentations before lunch. And then we might have the discussions after lunch, but you will have then time to think about, how to raise interest or what you want to discuss. The SDG Data Lab is a resource created by the UNSD with the aim to compare SDG data and explain discrepancies in national and custodian agency data. Data and metadata transfers in SDMX format is a key feature of the tool. However, as you recall from the invitation to this session, the tool is maybe not fully understood and uptake among countries has so far been somewhat limited. The task team on data transmission under this expert meeting, which you will get a short update from in just a minute, initiated a pilot for countries to test the SDG Data Lab, and a handful of countries flagged interest to participate, but it was halted last year of some reasons. But they are still looking for more countries to participate, and this session will be an opportunity to flag this interest. But we will also open to discussion to discuss what the needs of the countries are when it comes to data transmission, and also your priorities when it comes to address possible discrepancies in national versus global SDG data. We will afterwards hear from UK on behalf of UK and France, who has tested the tool and uploaded some SDG indicators to the SDG Data Lab. We will also hear from Belarus about their national experience in implementing SDMX and using the SDG Data Lab. And at the end of the session, we are very happy to have you in the Statistics Division here to tell us more about their plans for the SDG Data Lab. But first, we will get an update from the task team on data transmission. The task team is co-chaired by Claire Plateau from the French National Institute of Statistics and Economic Studies, INSEE, and now also Irina Erkova from the UK Office of National Statistics, the ONS. She's taking over from Otis Path. And I think Claire will now give the report from the task team. She is joining us online. And Claire, are you there? And please go ahead. Do we have Claire online?
She is online, but
maybe she's muted.
Her microphone is on. Claire, if you are speaking, we cannot hear you. What do you think? Just continue with.
Yeah, okay. I think we can then maybe move the report from the task team, and then we can go to the first presentation from the UK. So, as previously, I was kindly ask the online participants to type their question into the chat, and Jonathan will assist me here in keeping track there, so we can also read out the questions. The first presentations will be from the co-chairs as well, from the task team, and this is a recorded presentations from Otis Bath, who was the previous co-chair, together with Claire, from the UK Office of National Statistics. Otis left his position at the ONS in end of March, and he has very kindly recorded this presentation, but Claire will be hopefully with us online, and also Irina Erkova, who's taken over from Otis from the ONS, and they will be happy to take questions and comments afterwards. So please let's start the presentation.
Good morning and good afternoon to everyone attending UNECE. For those who I've not met previously, my name is Otis Bath and I represent the UK Office for National Statistics. And by the time you're viewing this, I'll have moved to another government department. will no longer be working on the SDGs. However, my colleague Irina Etrova will be taking over my responsibility as co-chair of the task team on data transmission. So it'll be the best point of contact for the UK henceforth. I thank you for the opportunity to present today. I'm sad I'm unable to attend this session in person or hold my co-chair position any longer. However, I'm eternally grateful for all the hard work that's gone into planning and organising this session. I thank Tina and Jonathan for making this possible, and for everyone who's participated in UNEC activity since I took this position. So today I'll be talking about the SDG Data Lab. This is an area of some debate and uncertainty, and it's not my place to determine if we continue to explore its usage. I personally feel like there is a use for the Data Lab. However, I'm unsure if we're maximising this or whether it's worth the time and resource we place in it. I will leave that for discussion for you guys to have after my presentation. So this is what the session is going to be looking at. So first of all, it's effectively a background session on the SDG Data Lab. So I'll run through what the Data Lab is, what the objectives are, what the requirements are of using the Data Lab, and then I'll begin to explore some of the challenges, so the advantages and difficulties of using the Data Lab. There'll be a brief look at how to upload data and metadata, but I'll also link externally to where you can where more comprehensive training on this has been provided previously. And then I'll talk a little bit about the UK case study, so about our experience in the UK. There'll be an invitation to collaborate, and then subsequently after this, you'll be able to discuss the relative merits and difficulties of using the Data Lab and come to a decision as to where you'd like the task team on data transmissions work to go, whether this is a priority. The plan is currently to run a pilot session with a number of countries after this UNEC expert meeting. However, this is not necessarily essential and something that could be reevaluated. So first and foremost, what is the Data Lab? Well, the SDG Data Lab is an online platform established by UNSD. The idea behind it being that it allows the exchange of SDG indicator and metadata by countries and custodian agencies with UNSD. Now, the kind of crux of it is it allows comparison of national and global data. So you can compare the data provided by countries against that provided by these international organizations, the custodian agencies. The basis initially was to gradually replace all other forms of data submission from the custodian agencies and countries to UNSD. So ideally replacing the UNSD Global SDG Indicator Database. And initially came out of a request of the 2017 UN Statistical Commission to present both international and national data alongside one another and to improve the dialogues between countries and custodian agencies. And some of these points at the end being really critical, the improving the dialogue, explaining and beginning to understand some of the discrepancies that emerge in the data, and then also improving coordination. So I've just touched on it a little bit, but some of the objectives of the Data Lab, the idea being that the Data Lab increases transparency of the data, improving international comparability and data availability. It also, as I briefly mentioned upon there, kind of reconciles the complementary roles of custodian agencies and countries, ideally improving communication between the two. Custodian agencies focusing on cross-country comparability and compliance with international standards. So because SDMX is used for the Data Lab, then it increases the use of these international standards. So NSOs being the main source informing policies and decision-making at the national level. So again, it's all about focusing on comparability and consistency of the data that countries are producing. And then a key aspect of it is that metadata is crucial. So if we're looking at the Data Lab, metadata must accompany the data to explain the differences that might exist. Without this, the discrepancies are, well, almost impossible to understand and the data can be misleading. So the metadata is just as critical a part of this as the data is. Now, I briefly touched upon the use of SDMX, but in terms of requirements of the Data Lab, you'll first need an account registered. Now, this sounds like a formality, but obviously, and it is an easy process of registering. However, we need to be wary of the amount of users that are currently using the Data Lab. We want it to be open, we want it to be accessible, but we've also got to make sure that we're not conflicting the data too much. I'll touch on this a bit later. The data needs to be SDMX compatible, and likewise with the metadata. So this XML format shown here is typical. And that's kind of it. The actual process is incredibly straightforward, and I'll run through that in a little bit. So in terms of some of the advantages, so as I said, the Data Lab allows this data exchange, and it greatly simplifies the process because the global and national data sets are both following the data structure definition. So the data structure definition setting out the requirements, the constraints that the data has to fit within, and that allows exchange to be simplified and efficient. We can compare with custodian agencies, and this is really important for understanding our data, kind of beginning to explain these trends that we have, and obviously the metadata is critical for this. In terms of usability, it's incredibly user-friendly, it's very easy and quick, and it allows this greater collaboration with custodian agencies, those that are producing the data. Now, when it comes to visualizations, it produces a clear and provide a simple way to display the differences. So looking at this, the Data Lab has a lot of key strengths, but there are also some difficulties of using the Data Lab that are incredibly important to weigh up when we're going to evaluate what activity we'd like to pursue further. So the Data Lab requires data and metadata to be in an SDMX compatible format. This is obviously critical for the work. It underpins it. However, if your data is not SDMX compatible, the lab might not be possible. When completing metadata, it's really important that we're specifying the difference between national and global. I've seen this mistake made a number of times where metadata or data is not being coded correctly, and it can cause data to be overwritten. It's quite easy to overwrite data, and it can create some problems. And as I touched upon, access is currently restricted to a small number of users for each country. The idea being that it's preventing too many users uploading data and metadata, which can introduce some conflicts if we're sourcing it from different places. So that's kind of the idea behind it. Now, in terms of how to upload data and metadata, I'll run through a really quick step-by-step guide here, and then I will also link off to a more comprehensive tutorial. So the process for uploading data to the Data Lab is very straightforward. So first and foremost, you need to ensure your data and metadata is in a compatible format. Now, there are obviously various different authoring tools, converters that can be used to get this to get your data into this right format. So for instance, in the UK, when we upload our data in XML. Sign into the platform, and in the top right hand side, you'll see there's an import data and metadata box. You click into that, you drag your files in, and then you wait for it to process. And that's it. That is as simple as it is. So we plan on running a pilot at the moment, and kind of more of the difficulty emerges in trying to get your data into the right standards, checking it for errors, making sure that it's compatible. The actual upload of data and metadata is really simple. And as I say, a full demonstration tutorial is available on the Task Team on Data Transmission wiki. However, also, if I click through this link, hopefully this will work. There is also an online training tutorial that runs through some of these aspects that I'm talking about today. And then Brock Fanning runs through very comprehensively some of the necessary items using various converters, uploading your metadata, uploading the data as well, and then some of the other aspects that I've talked about today. So if you would like to learn more, if you want to have a more comprehensive overview, there's a whole hour dedicated to it here. It's on the UN Stats YouTube page, or you can find it by searching for this video here. So I'll leave that there if anyone wants to find that and has more interest in the Data Lab. But for today's session, I'll keep it very brief. Now, I'll talk a bit about the UK because that's an area which I can discuss and might be of interest to some of you who are who are interested in uploading to the Data Lab or using the Data Lab. So we only completed our Data Lab upload in February of this year. Now, on the UK, we report our SDG data typically in CSV and Markdown. So CSV for the data, Markdown for the metadata. And as such, using the Data Lab did present some challenges. We had to map our data to the global DSD, and so our mappings ultimately made our data SDMX compatible. However, this was not a straightforward process. Thankfully, we use OpenSDG in the UK, which helps streamline this somewhat. Now, in the UK, this means that we only have 35 indicators SDMX compatible and uploaded onto the SDG Data Lab. There is some appetite to increase this further, although for a kind of trial and for getting us up and running, this is where we're up to at the moment. And then we have a separate UK data team who completed the metadata forms, and then we uploaded these to the SDG Data Lab. Now, as I touched upon, the actual upload itself didn't take very long, only took a couple of hours to do the whole process. But obviously a lot of time and effort went into making the data and metadata SDMX compatible. So it can be a time-consuming process. It's ultimately dependent on what your data format is, your structures, and how easy it is to change and map. So the plan is to scrutinize the data and metadata we've uploaded, to understand where the differences have emerged, and then to work with some of the custodian agencies to understand these. We'd like to upload more SDMX data. However, the way we're retrofitting it, effectively turning our data in CSV and metadata in Markdown to an SDMX compatible format, has made this a more lengthy process than if you initially reported your data in SDMX. But then a kind of an aspect of it in the UK as well is we'd like to support other countries who are interested in using the Data Lab. We've had some really good interest in running the pilot for uploading to the Data Lab. So this is something that we'll be looking at supporting in the future. This leads me on very nicely to the invitation to collaborate. So as I say, we plan on launching a pilot for interested countries and uploading data and metadata to the labs. The basis of this being it will hold sessions demonstrating the capability of this and provide support where possible. There has been some interest from a number of countries. However, anyone is welcome to join. However, I feel like this is something that you will now have the opportunity to discuss in the minutes that remain in this session. So I thank you all for listening. I welcome any comments and discussion on this aspect, and I look forward to seeing what work is completed in the future on this. Thank you all.
Thank you, and thanks to UK and France for the efforts in the task team on data transmission and for exploring the use of SDG Data Lab and for supporting others who want to explore the tool. Otis highlighted some of the benefits from the SDG Data Lab and its design, but I think he also pointed out to some of the bottlenecks, and I can relate to one of them from a national perspective. There's a more general observation regarding using SDMX, and that is when you not have data or metadata files in an SDMX format in your production system, it will need to do the converting. I'm going to open the floor for short questions and comment to this presentation. We do, however, struggle a bit to have France and UK online, but we will be happy to take questions and comments and convey them to Claire and Irina. So please, the floor is open. Anyone who wants to? We will also have some discussion afterwards, so it will be possible to and we hopefully have France and the UK with us then. Okay, I think I will move on to the next presentation. This is moving faster now than expected. The second presentation in this session is from Belarus, so please, Elena, you can come to the stage. Belarus will give us examples from their national experience in implementing SDMX and using the SDG Data Lab, and also have a good pilot example from working with the ILO. The presentation will be made by Ms. Elena Kyokarovich from the National Statistical Committee of the Republic of Belarus. Welcome. And for your information, this presentation will be translated to Russian, so you need to find, for those of you who need the English or other languages, you need to find a channel on your microphone. And I will say, Elena, the floor is yours.
Microphone. The speaker's microphone is off. My presentation touches on the use of the SDMX format and measuring SDG data. On the whole, the Belarus statistics has introduced the SDMX standard for the first time with a view to conduct SDG monitoring. Prior to that, we hadn't been operating that standard, and our experience boiled down to the theoretical knowledge we acquired at various seminars on the use of SDMX. In 2017, we moved on to the development of a national reporting platform for SDGs, and as we proceeded to develop that platform, it was important to take on board national and international experience of SDG monitoring. The SDMX format was approved by the UNSD for the exchange of data and metadata. Incidentally, the process of putting SDMX in place was quite strenuous and difficult because at the time the UNDS had not yet described the SDG structures. We chose to go our own way to take the overall guidance for the SDX format, and we tried to describe SDG indicators ourselves using our own reference books and our own codes. In order to get a grip on this process, we wrote to the ILO and asked them to conduct a data exchange pilot with them. Our ILO colleagues were quite kind in meeting us halfway, and I'd like to use this opportunity to express some thanks to them, because it was thanks to their expert support and the experience they already have in place in working with the SDMX standards. We analyzed and adjusted our data sets together, adding global SDG data, which was developed by the working group, or rather the task team on SDMX, and thanks to the exchange of these exchanges of data with the ILO, and because we already had knowledge of these global structures. I'm sorry, the speaker is saying, I'm just trying to find the right place. And so we finalized the platform using API, and we downloaded, we uploaded the SDG global indicators formatted in accordance with SDMX. So the platform today has more than 520 DSD structures, because each of the structures has a level of disaggregation, but the introduction of the standards has made it possible for our national statistics office, together with the statistics offices of 62 other countries, to upload data to a global level. Another important aspect of SDG monitoring is removing discrepancies between national data and the data supplied by custodial agencies globally. In our view, it is SDG Lab that comes forward as such a tool, allowing access to global and national data and metadata, making it possible to conduct a comparative analysis and to identify discrepancies between national and global data. That is done automatically, very simply, and this you can see these divergences on the slide, these discrepancies. The transmission of data, incidentally, is only possible when the indicators are in direct correspondence with global these structures. For example, according to our national law, we define young people as aged from 14 to 30, which is different from the UN classification, where that age is defined from 15 to 24. Which is why, in order to upload indicators for youth, we try to format them as it is done at global level. So countries are in a position to take measures in order to remove discrepancies and to ensure the global comparability of their data. The skills of the Data Lab and from the use of the SDMX format were obtained by us through, for example, the training course that was organized by the Eurasian Economic Commission jointly with the UNSD. At the same time, regardless of the fact that the SDMX format is friendly, user-friendly, not all of our data could be uploaded, for example, for infant mortality up to 5 years of age, disaggregated by gender. The indicators in the global SDG, SDMX format were in full accordance with our system, but when uploading, the system gives you this error. A similar error occurs for some reason when we try to disaggregate unemployment data for the disabilities. But we are pressing on with this work. We are expanding our national lists. We upload them into the global database. We're very grateful to the UNSD and Mr. Abdullah Gazulov personally for his assistance. In 2022, Belstat exceeded the community of SDMX users, international users, which is an additional source of information for the use of standards for the issues that tend to arise at various stages of SDMX implementation, as well as the platform for exchanging experience and innovations in this area, which is a high-quality platform to do that. In order to automate the exchanges of data with custodial offices, we enhance the work of the platform through the use of API. We are working to integrate the platform with other national systems and databases. Incidentally, Belstat does have a gender portal which contains all of the gender data, a children data portal, and also planning to introduce the SDMX format for children so that within the TransMoney initiative, we could exchange data. At present, we don't have an overall definition of DSD structures for the monitoring of indicators, for example, characterizing the status of children and adolescents. Our national reporting platform, alongside with disseminating SDG information, is also a tool for collecting data with a view to optimizing the data flows for SDGs from every national supplier of data who opened their dedicated offices to do that, and the latest rounds of updating the platform have made it possible to automate the transmission of data using either IP interface or hyperlink. In conclusion, I'd like to emphasize that we got started in terms of introducing SDMX for SDG monitoring, but the Belarus statisticians are now actively applying SDMX outside the SDG framework as well. We've used it for labor data, for migration data, and for consumer price index data. So thank you very much. This is a high-quality tool ensuring compatibility and in particular international compatibility of data. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena. And it was useful to see how Belarus has used the national standards for data exchange and APIs when establishing their national SDG reporting platform and when facilitating the data flow also nationally. I now open the floor for questions and comments to this presentation. Yes, Brazil.
Hi, Elena. My name is Felipe Pereira from Brazil. Thank you so much for your presentation. I was wondering if you, in the case when you find differences among your reporting and the custodian agencies, could you give us an example of how you followed up regarding a difference in a specific indicator? Thank you.
Thanks very much for your question. Now, what we do is we closely cooperate with all the custodian agencies responsible for these or other indicators. We've amassed a good deal of experience of cooperating with WHO, FAO, and we've held online consultations in the course of which we're able to fully eliminate these discrepancies. Well, these discrepancies had to do, well, first of all, we were in a position to go into more detail in analyzing all of the data sources suggested by this or that custodian agency when supplying the information to show how they conducted their calculations. But at a further stage, using the SDMX format, we were able to fully eliminate all the discrepancies vis-à-vis FAO and WHO, for example. But we are continuing to press on in this area. We already amassed some positive experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more comments and questions? Jonathan, do we have anyone online? No? Okay, I'm sure Elena will answer questions also after lunch if you thought about something during the break. Thank you. We will then move to the last presenter in this session, and we are very thankful that Mr. Abdullah Ghazalov in the UN Statistics Division is early up in the morning in New York and able to join us from his office. SDG Data Lab is set up by the UN Statistics Division, and Abdullah will give us some insights about the use and status of the Data Lab, and also tell us about the experience with the UNSD-FCDO countries working with them. The FCDO is the UK Foreign Development Office, for those who is not familiar with that. And Abdullah, I hope you're with us and ready. Please go ahead.
Yes, I'm online. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. So thank you, Live, and thank you for this opportunity to make this presentation on the SDG Lab and more generally on SDMX for the SDG indicators. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So let me begin. So the SDMX standards for the Sustainable Development Goal indicators are developed by the working group on SDMX for SDG indicators. The working group was established by the IG SDGs for the objectives of developing global data and metadata structures for SDG indicators, as well as develop, publish, and establish data exchange mechanisms for the SDG indicators. And on this page, you can see a link to the SDMX SDG. On the slide, you can see a link to the SDMX SDG page. So a brief overview of the timeline. The working group first met in late 2016. It piloted the SDG data exchange in 2018. The first release of the SDG data structure definition took place in June 2019. And that's when the actually production data exchange started. In 2019 and 2020, the working group moved on and focused on metadata. And in 2020, the metadata exchange was piloted. And by the end of the 2020, the metadata structure definition was finalized, and then finally the SDG global metadata set was published at the SDMX API early last year. So if we look at the current status of the global data and metadata exchange, data exchange was established with about 36 countries, metadata exchange with about 16 countries. Data exchange has been established with between UNSD and 5 custodian agencies. However, since these 5 agencies include some of the biggest reporters like FAO and UNEP and ILO and also IMF, the data that we receive over SDM, the global data that we receive over SDMX now constitute over 45% of the global database, which is a significant achievement. And the data set, the global data set has been available at the UNSD API since 2019, and the global metadata set has been available at the API since about a year ago. So I won't go into detail about the SDG Lab because the colleagues from the UK and Belarus covered that. I will only say that it's an online platform established by UNSD as part of the UNSD-FCDO project on SDG monitoring. And to facilitate automated data and metadata exchange of SDG indicators with both countries and custodian agencies. It is open to use by all countries. It's a resource available to all countries. And as has been, I think, explained at length, SDG Lab can be used to detect differences between global and national data sets, while metadata is crucial to explaining the differences. I will also briefly touch upon the global and national data sets. The global SDG DSD is used by countries and custodian agencies to submit their data to the SDG Lab through the global data flows. And the global SDG DSD supports the global SDG indicators, according to the indicator framework approved by the IG SDGs and their disaggregation. However, the General Assembly Resolution on 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development requires that the data needs to be responsive to the national context and support disaggregation that is relevant to the national context. Therefore, the recommendations are in place on how to customize the global SDG data structure for national use, how to extend the global DSD with national indicators and national disaggregation. So if a country wishes to make its national data set available as in the SDMX format, they can extend the global data structure definition with their national indicators and disaggregation. Basically you use the global SDG DSD to transmit the data. You can use it to transmit the data to the SDG Lab. You can use it to compare the global and national data sets. And you can use the customized national SDG TSD to disseminate your data set in the your SDG data, national SDG data set in the SDMX format to make it available for dissemination. I will say a few words about the reference metadata exchange. I'll have to tell you that automated reference metadata exchange is extremely rare. There are very few examples of automated exchange of reference metadata, and SDG is one such example. It is to create to put in place automated metadata exchange is quite complex, but we managed to overcome many of these difficulties. The process of preparing reference metadata in the SDMX format is as follows. You complete a word-based template, which is approved by the IAG SDGs. Then you use an authoring tool to convert it into the SDMX format, and then you can submit it to the SDG lab where it becomes available at the SDMX API. And the processes for global and national metadata are quite different. Of course, countries define their national metadata. The global metadata, the global methodology is proposed by the custodian agencies and approved by the IAG SDGs. So following the approval of the global metadata, it is published at the SDMX API. So why we need all this? Well, the fact that data and metadata are both available in a machine readable format. What it makes possible is it makes possible to link data and reference metadata. We have a metadata, UNSD has a metadata dissemination website where you can query metadata and you can retrieve those indicators that you need, which of course is quite useful to the user. And moreover, you can link data and metadata, which the global SDG database currently does. Thanks to the metadata availability in a machine-readable format at the global SDG database website, you can now, as you explore the data, you can click a button and retrieve metadata for that particular indicator, which is, again, a significant achievement. So I think that Otis in his presentation already covered the process. What does it take to exchange data with the SDG Lab? First and foremost, you map your global indicators and disaggregation to the global SDG DSD. This is where almost all of the effort goes. And this is not surprising. The SDG indicator framework is very complex. There are hundreds of indicators and they are more serious and they're highly disaggregated. So whichever technology you use, mapping your data to the global standard is the most involved part of the exercise. Once you have mapped your data, you can convert it into SDMX using any of a number of tools available, and depending on your infrastructure and requirements, and then you upload those indicators to the SDG Lab. In the case of reference metadata, I think that the most involved exercise is compiling metadata for your indicators, which can be quite, again, involved given how broad the indicator framework is and how many institutions are involved in reporting SDG indicators, whether at national or global level. But once the metadata has been compiled, you can complete the word-based SDG metadata template and then convert it to SDMX using the metadata authoring tool and then upload it to the SDG Lab. So that this part of the process is quite straightforward and easy. So I think that Open SDG has been mentioned in previous presentations. I would like to bring it up because it is a dissemination platform which is currently maintained by the UK Office of National Statistics, which was designed to specifically support the global SDG data structure definition. And what it means is that if you make your data available in the if you map your data, your national data to the global SDG GSD, which you can extend with your national indicators and disaggregation, then that data can be uploaded to the Open SDG website. It's actively used by, I think, over 20 countries, and UNSD has, cooperated, I think, quite well with the ONS on this in terms of data exchange. So why I think that this is very important because this is a platform that supports a global data structure definition. And I hope that eventually more platforms will be created that support global data structures. For example, for national accounts, for labor, for other statistical subject matter domains. And in this sense, OpenSDG is the trailblazer, and it that gives the benefit to the countries, an additional benefit to the countries for mapping their data to the global structures. I will try to briefly go over capacity building. Over the last few years, extensive training was provided to 20 countries as part of the UNSD-FCDO project on SDG monitoring. The project has now completed. There has been extensive capacity building in the ESCO region. There has been training in the African region in cooperation with UNECA and the African Development Bank, training in the Asian region, thanks to the Asian Development Bank and ESCAP support. I would also like to mention that the upcoming SDMX Global Conference, which will be held in late 2023, will also have a capacity building session for both beginners and advanced users. And finally, the pandemic spurred the development of online training courses, and I would like to mention two of those. The SDMX Foundation e-learning course, it was developed by the Asian Development Bank in cooperation with UNSD, ESCAP, and CIAP. It provides introduction to SDMX. And if you don't have any experience, I think it's a very good place to start. It gives you the basic knowledge of SDMX. And more specifically on the SDGs, e-learning course on SDMX for SDG indicators is now available, has been available since the beginning of the year. It does have a prerequisite. You do need to be familiar with the basic concepts, basic knowledge of SDMX, and you can take the SDMX Foundation course developed by the ADB if to gain that basic knowledge if you don't already have it. And this e-learning course covers in detail the SDG data structure definition, data flows, content constraints, customization of the SDG GSD, and other aspects. And finally, I'm grateful to Belarus for having mentioned the SDMX user forum. It's a very useful resource where you can ask questions, where you can find answers, where you connect with the community. And we encourage you to join the SDMX user forum to ask any questions and receive support related to SDMX. And that's it on my part. Thank you, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Abdullah. And I know that you might not be able to join us after lunch, so any questions and comments to Abdullah's presentation, I would advise you to give it now. It seems to me that a lot of efforts have been made to make this tool easy to adapt for countries, and there is a lot of material out there to start with. Putting my Norwegian hat on, I must admit that we have not investigated this very much, but we are currently working with metadata for our national indicators, so we should probably look into it as well. It's also interesting to hear that you are planning to extend it to other statistical domains, because I think then it will track more if we extend it to other domains as well. So any comments, questions for Abdullah, please go ahead. Tina has a question.
Thank you. And thank you, Abdullah, for being up so early. I think it's 5 in the morning or what it is in New York. I have 2 questions about this SDG Data Lab. I understand that it was developed as part of this one extra budgetary project which ended. So how is the status now? Are you somehow actively maintaining this SDG Data Lab? Is it still possible that you will make some developments on that or not? And the other question that what some countries have asked from here, that countries who are registered to use this data lab, they can upload and compare their own data, but they cannot see other countries' data. Would it be possible to also to provide access to this data by other countries, so to be able to see that if, let's say, in one type or one indicator, your country has discrepancies, 2 other countries have similar problems, or somehow to see, to be able to see what are those common and maybe main issues with the discrepancies for more countries than just your own? Thank you.
Please go ahead, Abdullah. Yes.
Thank you, Sina. Thank you for your questions. Yes, you are correct. The SDG Data Lab was developed as part of this project, which has now completed. We are maintaining it. It is more difficult to find resources to maintain this product once the project is over. However, we are putting an effort into maintaining it because it is a component of the SDG Global Platform and it is a component of the data exchange. So yes, we do have plans for it, and we hope the plans will materialize, but this is now subject to resource constraints. We are trying to find resources to upgrade the SDG Lab. Regarding the second point, it is actually a difficult one because different countries have, I think, different views on how their national data can be used. And some countries have resisted opening their data sets at the SDG Lab to the public. They have used SDG, many countries have used SDG Lab as a kind of validation tool where they upload their data and they compare it to the global data set and they try to identify issues in their data. And often they have been quite successful. I know that we're running late, but I would like to give one very illustrative example where we worked with one of the countries that upload their data sets, and for this indicator 611 population with access to an improved water source, their figures were around 70%, whereas the global figure from WHO was about, I think, 7.8%. So you had a difference of, so the difference was an order of magnitude. The country was appalled. They took a huge issue with this, and they said that we stand behind their data. We don't understand how WHO got theirs. However, when we looked into the metadata, what we found was that the global indicator measures proportion of population with access to an improved water source on premises, whereas the national indicator measures proportion of population with access to an improved water source within the walking distance. And that made all the difference. And it's these kind of issues that the SDG lab was designed to detect and help them detect it. But it's also a reason why some of the countries resisted opening their national data to the public. It is a difficult issue. It is an issue where we would welcome guidance from the countries, and they should voice their views on that at the IIG SDGs, so that we know how better to deal with national data sets at the global level. I hope, Tina, that answers your question.
Thank you, Abdullah, for very good information on this. And we are running late, as you said, and we have translation. So
2 more minutes.
We have 2 more minutes. So I just have to thank you very much, Abdullah. And I really want Sarah to just make a short comment before we end the meeting, because she have the questions that I want you to think about for the afternoon. And we will continue.
So I'm going to do the questions.
If you have time to put them up, and then maybe...
I can't put them up.
Yeah.
Yes, we can display them.
Yeah. Okay, so we will display the questions, and after lunch, Sarah will do a brief report from the task team. I think we have a photograph we should take, and I will leave the word to Renata, and we will see you in the afternoon. Thank you.
We'll continue a bit with this session after the lunch, and now I invite you for 2 hours break, lunch break, and this photo mentioned earlier by Jonathan. Now you can see the questions. Yeah, you can see the questions, so please keep these questions in mind and think about them during the lunch break, and we'll continue the discussion after the lunch. So we should be back here at 2:30. 2:30. So yeah, exactly 2 hours break. Enjoy your lunch. Thank you.
And for this photo, so we are now going to take a group photo. This will be in room 20, which is 2 floors up from here. So I will lead you, and Jonathan will be at the end to gather everybody who is risks being left behind. It is a very nice room. Then you can see it also because it has a so-called like 3-dimensional painting in the ceiling. And the room, it's Human Rights Council room, and the room was offered with this painting by Spain. It was done just, I don't know, like 7-8 years ago. So follow me, and then Jonathan will be, yes.
We are going to start this afternoon with the continuing on from before lunch and have the so I'm going to leave the floor to Live to continue the session.
Yes, great, thank you. So welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch, and for those of you who are new in the building, found a place to have lunch. Maybe saw some peacocks in the garden. It's a good advice in a way to go out and look for them. So we have been generously given another half an hour maximum to discuss and round up this session on SDG Data Lab, and also the work on the task team on data transmission, which I have now Sarah, who will give us a brief update from the task team before we open the floor for you to discuss and give your views on the questions she already put up at the screen, but she will also come back to those at the end of her very short presentation. So please, Sarah, go ahead.
Thanks. Okay, so I promised to do a short update on the task team of data transmission. So the aim of this task team is to facilitate SDG data transmission through exchanging knowledge and experience on the application of transmission standards such as SDMX and transmission methods and similar tools such as APIs that make automation of data transmission possible. So that was what we sort of decided from the outstart when this task team was created. Next slide, please. The task team has done a lot of work already. They've created an information portal on data transmission technologies and tools on the UNECE Wiki. They have collected case studies, contributed to the UNECE roadmap on statistics, the second edition of that roadmap. They have shared knowledge and experience through SDG workshops, and they have also added, or their work has sort of led to us adding a column to the UNECE country's progress table on the use of SDMX to transfer data, SDG data. That's what we talked about this morning. And the work plan for 2023, or the focus for 2023, has been to on countries' experience using SDG Data Lab, the advantages and difficulties, and to figure out if there's if additional help is needed, and perhaps if additional functionality would be required to work on that. The original work plan included a pilot looking at countries transmitting data using SDMX to the UN Data Lab. There has not been a lot of interest in this pilot, so that we are sort of, one thing we wanted to get out of this session is also if there is appetite for this work, or if there is something else that you would want to know more about as experts in this field. And so there is room for sort of revising or refining the task team's mandate, and the steering group would like to have some advice from you on that issue. Okay, did I not ask you to change slides? Sorry.
Noticed.
Okay, but you can change slides now. Because we put together some questions or discussion points that we want to hear from you about. So if countries that have used SDMX to transmit data to SDG Data Lab, what are the benefits that you've seen, and do you find that there are tangible outcomes of that exercise? Also, if there are examples, so we heard some examples this morning on data discrepancies have been identified and resolved somehow after the comparison in the SDG Data Lab. Also, what are national priorities or views on possible discrepancies between global reported indicators and global indicators produced for national reporting? But what do you think about this issue with discrepancies? And regarding the work of the task team on data transmission, what would countries need to know more about, and what would be helpful for countries? So are there other issues in the field of data transmission that this expert meeting would want to have addressed?
Thank you very much, Sarah. And then we all have a few points to think about and to respond to as an input to the steering group's decision on further priorities when it comes to the data transmission issue and the task team's work. And now we went, this is exciting. I still see a lot of faces though, because we have all these screens with
Because of the
battery.
screens, yeah.
First, Jonathan is on the issue. This reminds me about an incident in Paris once, when this also happened. It seems like they have lights up at the translation booths anyway, so there we get back on. Good, thank you.
We are back.
I will let you address any of the questions on the screen, so we will not follow a specific order. I would just like you to engage. And before we start, just to inform you that Abdullah is with us from the UNSD still, so he can take questions directly regarding the SDG Data Lab tool as well. Thank you. So please. Any flags?
I could start with questions for Abdullah. Yeah, we have some questions.
Okay.
For Abdullah.
So one of the co-chairs wants to have a question. Sarah, please.
Yes, I actually have a question for Abdullah, since he's still with us. So the SDG Data Lab was envisioned originally to allow the exchange of SDG indicators, data, and metadata between countries and custodian agencies, and between custodian agencies and the UNSD, as I understand it. And sort of to gradually replace all other forms of data submission to custodian agencies from countries. And also to facilitate dialogue between countries and custodian agencies. Is this still the vision? And if not, is there another vision? No, we don't
thank you,
hear
Sarah.
you.
You need
Can you
to
hear me now? You
need
cannot
to
hear
use
me?
the thing. Sorry,
Yes.
now I hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So SDG Lab was not created to facilitate transmission between countries and custodian agencies, no. SDG Lab was created to facilitate transmission between the countries and UNSD on the one hand, and custodian agencies and UNSD on the other. And yes, it can help facilitate dialogue between the countries and custodian agencies to on the subject of differences between national and global data sets, because yes, as we have discussed, they can help flag differences between the national and global data sets. So this is the short answer to your question. SDG Lab continues to function, and the countries it's open to you for use by the countries, the countries can continue to upload their data and compare their data to the current version of the global data set. But as regards data transmission between the countries and custodian agencies, that is kind of outside of the scope of the SDG Lab. That's the short answer to that question.
Okay, thank you very much, Abdullah. Do we have any other comments or questions? Are there anyone? I think Claire raised her hand in the chat.
And we have Brazil.
And Brazil next. So Claire from France, please.
We still can't hear her.
We can't hear you, Claire. Could you possibly type your question in the chat? I could do Brazil while you do it. Is that okay? Yes, I think I give the floor to Brazil then.
Thank you. Once Abdullah is online, I have a follow-up question from what you said in the morning. Someone asked about comparison of countries' data, and then you mentioned how sensitive this can be when a country doesn't have different calculations. And my very simple solution was let the country decide if he wants to make its data available for every other countries to see or not, if you want to make it public or not. Could you comment on that?
Yes, it could be possible. It is obviously technically possible, and the country could decide whether to publish its data or not. At this time, the SDG Lab does not support it, but it could be implemented in principle, given a little resources. What we would appreciate really is guidance on dealing with the national data sets at the global level. Because there is I don't think that there is a consensus among the countries of how to treat their data sets. We did not see it on the UNSD-FCDO project. Some countries wanted to have their data set published, others did not want to have it published. There were issues with the consistency and integrity of the data sets that they publish. So if we could have if we could see a clear demand to have these data sets published, and if we could would also very much appreciate guidance from the IIG SDGs on the same, then we could try to find resources to make it possible. This is my answer to your question. But again, at this time, we don't have the resources. We would have to find them.
Okay, thank you very much, Abdullah. Claire, is the question now coming from her? No. Anyone else who wants to take the floor? It is a very technical issue we are discussing here today, and but I'm just throwing out. Are we kind of accepting that there are differences or discrepancies in the data, and is that maybe accepted to a larger extent than in the beginning? Yes, please.
It's not on SDG Lab. Can I comment on other questions? Okay. So there are two issues, and the colleague from the statistical office can come in if I'm wrong. One is between the custodian agencies and the focal point in the countries. So the custodian agency, I'll give an example, will go to a ministry directly, send a questionnaire, data comes in, it's not verified by the statistical office. And then there's this discrepancy. This happens a lot of times. So I don't know if there are experiences on how to deal with that. The other issue is about the SDGs that are not relevant for the countries. I don't know if we should discuss it at this point, but just a question to the colleagues on experiences. Which is the body in the country that decides that a target is not relevant? I mean, the statistical office knows that some targets, for example, Serbia is landlocked. 14 number of targets in 14 are not relevant, but they're not sure how to, who decides these targets are not relevant for the country. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Those questions and comments. I mean, it's a pertinent question. Yeah, I'm not sure if someone from the EIG wants to comment on it, but of course we want the custodian agencies want the data to be presented for a certain number of countries, but I mean, we're all facing the same issue. I think that some indicators are not relevant at the national level, and we don't have the data, or we cannot produce them. So yes. Okay, I have a written comment from Claire in the chat, and I will give the floor next to Orange. Thank you.
Abdullah also has his hand up.
Abdullah also has it. Then we take Claire and Abdullah and then Orange. Thank you.
So I'm just gonna read out Claire Plateau's comment, and she writes, the benefit of the SDG Data Lab is to have a cross vision of discrepancies between SDG data produced by agencies and countries. But from my point of view, to solve the problem, we need to get in touch with agencies to make an agreement. Nevertheless, the SDMX standard might be useful to exchange data between countries or within a country.
Thank you, Claire. And Abdullah, do you want to comment?
Yeah, thank you. I will not comment on the relevance of targets and indicators because this is really outside of the scope of the SDMX. SDMX is a container, and it's not our job, so to speak, to decide what you put into that container. But I will comment on differences between the national and global data sets. Most of the time they are legitimate, right? And they are caused by the fact that the agencies use harmonized methodology and the countries do not always use harmonized methodology. But in some cases, and that is an issue for the SDGs, but also beyond the SDGs. In some cases, you can have two indicators which sound very similar or identical, but in reality are completely different. I mean, I gave you an example. Supposedly the same indicator, population, a proportion of population with access to an improved water source. You have the global indicator and the national indicator. Supposedly it's the same indicator, but in one case the figure is 7.8%, and in the other case the figure is 70%, the difference by an order of magnitude. The thing is that, and my worry has always been, that if these issues are not looked into, then it can undermine the public faith in our data, in our statistical data. They look at the national data, they see a figure of 70%. They look at the global data and they see a figure of 7.8%. This is not normal. This should not be. In this case, in this particular case, it was basically a wrong mapping because the country mapped its national indicator to the global indicator, whereas it should not have done that. It should not have done that because even if the national indicator has the same title as the global indicator, it has a different definition. What the countries should have done and what they did eventually is they just clarified the title of their indicator, proportion of population to an improved water source within walking distance. And then it's fine. But once again, this issue is extremely important because if the public sees these discrepancies, these huge differences, unexplainable without metadata between the global and national data sets, it will undermine their faith in it. And it can compromise basically the both the international agencies and national agencies' work. And this issue is quite serious. So to come back, in the majority of cases, the differences are relatively small, and they are to be expected because they're caused by differences in methodology of data sources. But in some cases, such as this, something definitely needs to be done about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very good clarification there. I will give the floor to Ovensh from the European Environmental Agency, please.
If it's okay with everybody, I would like to come back to the questions with my background experience from the Turkish Statistical Institute, not from Environmental Agency, especially on the relevance of the SDG indicators on country level. For example, we included the SDG indicator, global SDG indicator list in the official statistics program in Turkey as the official national coordinator of the statistics, the monitoring framework. So on a decree level legislation, we published the SDG indicators, all the relevant ones, and so we naturally excluded the irrelevant ones on country level. That's how a country can solve this relevancy issue. And on this second point about the discrepancy between national data and the international data, the issue, even at lunch we discussed this with Carolina, that we talked about this topic in the very first expert meeting, like 6 or 7 years ago. It was even an issue back in the day. What the transforming our agenda says basically is this should be a country-led, country-driven process based on the official national data. This is written in the transforming our world document, basically. But what we are doing as national statistical offices and custodian agencies in the past 7 years we are keeping our own mandates in our own silos and we are not interacting properly the way we had to do according to the transforming our world agenda. What we had to do basically is to especially for custodian agencies, to create their capacity, their international indicators, to be produced on national level, at national level, to overcome these discrepancies, basically. And we have been discussing this issue in the past expert meetings as well, and now we are in midpoint in the 2030 agenda. I think we should find a way to...
Apologies for the interruption with the interpretation side. Can we check that all remote participants have muted their microphones, please? Thank you.
Okay, are we good? No feedback now. Thank you very much for the comment there, Orange. Yes. Anyone else?
We have a hand raised by Claire.
Claire from France, raise your hand, please, Claire.
You can't hear me too?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, you can hear. Oh, thanks. Yes, I would like just to add the main discrepancies we discovered in France were due to the denominator, the population without these territories, which was taken by UNICE and not by us or something like that. But these discrepancies were well known before. But there were no other discrepancies, or we were aware of it because metadata were not the same. Or sometimes it might be modelization, for instance, people dying because of population. We have national model. It is not a global model for harmonized data, but we can understand why data are not the same. Many thanks.
Thank you, Claire. And I have a feedback again. There we are.
Claire should be muted.
I think it was here. I recognize that problem. You know, when we have quite frequent updates of population data, and it's also modeled by the UNSD. It is some discrepancies in the data because of the denominator, definitely. Yes, more questions or comments? We have 5 minutes left. This is your chance to give a wish to the steering group on what you want to do with data transmission in the coming year. No? Okay, I will just list a couple of key takeaways from the session. We have discussed the SDG Data Lab, and I think we all agree that metadata is key to understand the discrepancies in data, and this is really something the SDG Lab is useful to in detecting, and it could assist countries and custodian agencies in the following discussion in solving these issues when the global and national definitions and computing of data might deviate. The second is that from an observation is that maybe SDMX is not a format used widely in the countries, so there is kind of a threshold to upload in SDMX format. It might be a bottleneck. However, it seems to be quite easy to convert these data sets to SDMX format, as the Data Lab has a lot of learning material and templates to do so. But I still think we have a big difference in both between the countries and also between statistical domains in how much the SDMX is used actually for transferring data to international organizations, and definitely also within the country, even if we saw the example for Belarus where they are implementing these also for national transmission of data. So it's only left for me to say thank you to all the presenters who contributed well to the session, and to the participants who engaged in the discussion, and I will hand over to Sarah. Thank you.
Yes, because apparently I chair this session or this meeting. Great, thank you. I am not completely sure that we actually got exactly what we wanted from this session. We wanted some more guidance, but I can tell you I got some other great ideas for future work that might not be connected to data transmission, but other things. But thank you very much for everyone who contributed to